today I wanted to talk about how to teach your horse to turn on the forehand. When we went to shoot this video, it was super windy, so our audio got messed up, and that's why I'm sitting here doing the video as such, but I will still share the clips with you so you guys can put two and two together to see visually what it's supposed to look like. And also, I just want to thank everyone who subscribed to our channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. If you subscribe, make sure you leave a comment and let us know that you have. I'd love to say hello to you guys. Alright, so what is turning on the forehand? Turning on the forehand is when your horse will pivot on its forehand, and what this means is that the horse's hind corners are technically going to move around the horse's front end. So the horse's front end will stay still for the most part, the feet will be moving a little bit, but the hind end will be stepping one leg in front of the other to help the horse swing its body around its front end. Really complicated, I know, but it's a great thing to teach your horse. There's a lot of useful things for it. So if you want to teach your horse lateral movements, that's like getting your horse to move sideways, this is where you start. You want to start by teaching your horse to step one leg in front of the other on both the front end and the hind end. And there's also just a bunch of random things where turning on the forehand can be helpful. Like if you're on the ground and you walk through a gate, you get your horse to just move its butt around so it's facing you. Even if you're on the horse trying to shut a gate, turning on the forehand is a great thing to use to do that. If you're at the mounting block and the horse keeps scooting away, you can just ask them to turn on the forehand and move their butt closer to the block. There's just a ton of reasons that this specific technique is helpful. So this week we're gonna do turn on the forehand, and the next video we'll put out is turn on the haunches, which is basically the opposite of turn on the forehand. And so if you're curious to know more, stay tuned for that video because that will teach you how to move the horse's front end. So before you jump on your horse and try to do this in the saddle, you're gonna want to make sure you can do it on the ground. I'll show you what to do on the ground and then how it correlates in the saddle and the cues you can use to get your horse to do this. But right now let's talk about the groundwork aspect. So like I mentioned earlier, what you're gonna be looking for is for the horse's back legs to cross one in front of the other. So the first thing I'm gonna start on the ground is simply getting the horse to disengage their hind end. What disengaging the hind end means is basically the exact same thing as turn on the forehand. The horse is just swinging its hind end around and stepping one leg in front of the other. The reason we call this disengaging the hind end is because it takes all the power away from the horse. So if your horse is trying to take off or bolt or spook, or if you're on them and they're trying to rear or buck, you can quickly just get them to disengage their hind end, and that power is gone from them and you'll have better control. So if you're new to disengaging the hind end on the ground, or your horse is new to it, one super easy thing that you can do to get them to do this is simply ask them to bend their neck to the side. And when you ask a horse to do that, they're just naturally probably gonna step their hind end away because they're trying to escape that pressure. When they swing their hind end around, you can just keep going with them so they learn to stop and hold the pressure. But you'll notice that that's how you get that movement. You know, pulling the head to the side, you'll notice that hind end is swinging around, and that movement of the hind end swinging around is basically gonna be the movement of turn on the forehand. So as you can see in this clip, what I do is I'm gonna, like I said, apply pressure to the lead rope to ask the horse to bring its head to the side. I'm gonna bring my hand with the lead rope in it up to the horse's withers, and that's gonna be my cue to the horse, both on the ground and in the saddle, that they need to step their hind end around. And then just in the beginning, what I'll do is I'll use the end of my lead rope and just kind of wave it at the horse's hind end so they know that they're supposed to step away from that pressure. So in the beginning when you do this, as soon as you see the horse step away with the hind end, stepping one leg in front of the other, you can just stop and reward them with big pats and just let them stand and take a break. That way they learn that that is the movement you want from them when you do those cues. So for now, I'm just gonna tell y'all to pull the horse's head to the side in the beginning, just so you understand the concept of the horse stepping its hind end over, and the horse also understands it. But once they get good at that, going forward, I'm just gonna have you apply pressure to the lead rope towards the withers. The horse doesn't need to tilt its head in at all. You just need to apply that pressure, and then you can just walk towards the hind end to ask them to swing it around and move it away from you. Not only is this teaching them turn on the forehand, but it's also great groundwork for teaching respect in personal space. So the horse is learning to step away from the pressure you're applying, and that's great. That means that they're gonna learn when it comes to boundaries, that if you're near their hind end, they need to be respecting where you are in your space. Wait, y'all, before we go any further, real quick, if you haven't already, just subscribe to our channel. We're putting out new horse videos every week. Now let's get back to turn on the forehand. So before I get in the saddle, I just like to make sure that my horse has this down really pat on the ground. So I'm gonna start incorporating it into some other groundwork things. You can incorporate it into lunging and asking them to stop and get them to face you or change direction or any of that stuff. And also I'm just gonna work on getting my horse to move his hind end around with more subtle cues. Maybe I don't have to walk right up behind them to their hind end, but I can just stay at their shoulder and wiggle my rope towards their hind end, and they'll just step right over. So you can start playing along with it. The better your horse responds, and the better your horse responds to more subtle things, that means they grasp the idea much more. So when you get in the saddle, it's gonna be much more easy for them to understand and to do. Another thing I'm gonna do is I can also start teaching the horse the leg cue for this. So how the leg cue is gonna incorporate to getting the horse to swing its hind end around. So what I'll do is I'll just stand at the horse's shoulder, and I'm, like I have been, gonna bring my hand with the lead rope up to the horse's withers, applying that pressure. But now I'm just gonna take my thumb and gently press it into the horse's side where my foot would go. So when you're in the saddle, you're gonna cue your horse by putting your foot behind the girth and applying pressure there. That area is gonna control the hind end. So when you apply the pressure there, they're gonna learn that they need to step their hind end away. So right now, I'm just gonna do that with my thumb. I'm just gonna press my thumb lightly into their side. As soon as the horse goes to swing its hind end around, I'm just gonna stop and reward them so they know that that's what I want. Now it's time to get on your horse and try turn on the forehand in the saddle. When I first get on my horse and I go to teach them this, I'm not gonna immediately go and try to get them to do a perfect turn on the forehand. I don't expect that out of them, but I'm just gonna incorporate what I taught them on the ground into the saddle. So the first thing I can start with is just simply getting the horse to disengage its hind end. You're gonna do that the exact same way that you did it on the ground. I'm gonna ask my horse to bring its head around to the side. I'm using my rein, and I can just put my hand on my hip and apply that pressure, and then I'm gonna take my leg and put it behind the girth and just squeeze a little, and that is gonna get the horse to swing its hind end around. For those of you who don't know, this is also an emergency one rein stop. So like I mentioned earlier, if your horse is ever freaking out and you're on them, if they're bucking and rearing or trying to take off, you can immediately turn their head to the side, squeeze a little with your leg, they're gonna swing their hind end around, and you immediately take that power away from them to do those things. So one thing I love to do with my horses when I'm working on disengaging the hind end is that I'll just get them walking and I'll just let them walk out, and then as I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna slide my hand down the rein, grab the rein and bring it back to my hip, and I'll apply that leg pressure behind the girth. The horse will swing its leg around, and I'll let them do that until they come to a standstill, and then I'll let them walk on. And that way they're just getting that movement, that disengagement, and they're stepping their hind end around. Another reason I do this specifically before I go right into turn on the forehand, I'm still working on getting my horse responsive to my aids and helping them understand the concept before I go and try to do the whole thing. So when you're on your horse, it can be kind of difficult to tell whether or not they're actually stepping one leg in front of the other in their back end. So one way you can tell is they may swish their tail, or you can just feel their hind end swing underneath you. Another thing you can do is if you have a friend or your instructor or your parent with you, they can let you know what's happening. So once you have that down, it's time to actually do a turn on the forehand. So in the beginning, what I like to do with the horse is I'm gonna ride them and stop them right in front of a fence. The reason I do this is because I just don't want the horse to walk out of the movement. This is kind of a more difficult thing for them to do, and so they'll try and step out of the movement instead of doing the hard thing of swinging their hind end around. So I'm gonna line up with the fence, I'm gonna stand facing the fence on my horse, and I'm just gonna use the fence as kind of my block so my horse doesn't step forward. I'm gonna just work on getting my horse to swing its hind end both to the left and the right. And in the beginning, all I'm looking for is one small step from the hind end. I don't need them to take 5 steps. I just need them to start by understanding the concept, one little step, reward them, and then go from there. Cues are important. If you don't know how to cue correctly, your horse isn't gonna know how to respond correctly. So let me cover these real quick before we move on. So when you're in the saddle getting your horse to turn on the forehand, what you're gonna wanna do is on the side that you want the horse to move away from, you're gonna hold pressure with your rein and kind of bring it back to the withers like you've been doing this entire time teaching it to them. Then you're gonna take that leg and put it behind the girth to cue them. just as you did with your thumb doing groundwork. You want your leg to be in the same place that you taught them to move away with the pressure from your thumb. And some horses will move right away just with these cues. If your horse is having a little bit more difficult time, one thing you can do is on the side the horse is moving towards, you can kind of open your thigh and open your hip a little bit, and that will encourage the horse to move into that area just by using your seat. So now that you know the cues, you can ask your horse to turn on the forehand. And once again, remember, as soon as they take the smallest step in the beginning, you can stop and reward them. You can even let them walk away from the fence just to take a breather and to know that they've done good and that's what you wanted from them. So when teaching your horse on the forehand, horses usually have a stronger side where it's easier for them to move towards. And so what I do with my horses is I just practice both ways, making sure that they can swing their hind end in both directions. And that way, when you need it, it's there. And they will be responsive, and you're not going to have to fight them one way versus the other. So what I like to do is I'll just get my horse to stand parallel to the fence, and then I'll ask them to turn on the forehand all the way, so then they're suddenly parallel to the fence facing the other direction. And that's a great exercise you can do with your horse in the beginning, just to get them comfortable with the cues and understanding what you're asking. Once you are good with that, then you can try by moving away from the fence and doing the cues. This will be a little bit more challenging now because the horse could walk out of the movement, so it's just something to practice. If they are walking out of the movement when you're away from the fence, I recommend going back to the fence or maybe putting a pole out in front of them, and that way, you know, you're just kind of creating that block for them, but you're also slowly moving them in the direction where they will be able to do it away from the fence. And just a reminder, we do have the video coming out next about turn on the haunches. So if you like this video and you want to learn what's next, it'll be turn on the haunches, and we'll cover the same things in that video, getting them to turn on the haunches on the ground and then once you're in the saddle. So once that video is published, I'll go ahead and just put the link in the description of this video so you can click it and go see it. And as always, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more weekly horse videos.